Okay, so let's actually add another, do a little bit more with Git workflow. The other thing that I did here is I actually, since the last video, I actually set this up on Waffle.io, which again, the idea is that you're gonna want to sort of move cards over as you start adding features. So let's say there's some features I want to add for employees. And I'm going to start out with adding a server-side route for my employees. And if I go over here, I'll assign myself to this card, and I'll move it over so that it's ready, and I'm going to start working on it. So what I'll do here is I'm going to go in and I will do a checkout. One thing that never hurts to do is to just do a poll, just to make sure you're up to date with your project. And I'm going to do a checkout -b, and I'll say EK create server-side route for employees. Now I'm over here, and I'm going to go back. My tests are actually still running from before. Here's our employee model. Let's actually go in. We're going to do another copying and pasting here. We have this members only test. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to call this employee test. And let me just change the text here. So this is going to be my employee's route that I'm testing. And I'm going to kill this, and I just want to run that test. So I could say employee's route. Okay. So again, this is not really my route, but let's go in and we're going to make this a little bit easier. So what I want to describe. Let's describe /employees. Okay. And so this is using super test. We've looked at super test as promised. That's something we can take a look at. And I'm going to, this is going to be an open route, so I'm not going to need to, anyone's going to be able to see these lists of employees, but we could actually modify that. Well, let's do it that way. We'll do the same thing. So when we do the same thing, and we're going to say get employees not authenticated, and we'll go over here and we'll say get employees authenticated. So we went over here, we can just see that here's our employees route, right? We're testing these things out. And this is working, but I'm not actually testing out the right route. So let's start out with say API employees, and we're going to expect a 401 when we're not logged in. And we end up getting that 401. And so let's actually look at this. So here we expected a 401, but we got not found. So let's actually go and add that route. It's fairly easy to do this, simple route, by going up to our server, app, routes. We've got this members route, which is here. I'm just going to, again, copy this. This is going to be employees. In order for this to work, what I want to do is that I'm going to go in. I could keep this really exactly the same. I just copy this over. But if I look at this index file, this is where my routes are getting added. And you can see how this is going to end up nesting, because there's a router.use/API over here in the index for our app somewhere or other. Let's see if we can find that. Yeah, so we've got inside our app.use/API, where we end up requiring our routes. If we look inside of our routes, we're using members here. So this ends up sort of nesting our middleware there, allows us to create these routes pretty easily. And so here we'll say that this is going to be employees. This is going to require employees. This is going to actually get our test to pass. So we've got a not found, and the reason why we end up getting a not found, let's go back into this employees route, and we'll just change this so it's not looking to get this secret stash, it's just going to this /route. Now our tests will end up passing, but this is really not what we want to do here. We want to actually return our employees. So you could actually see this is where passport is being used here, so we can look and see whether or not we are authenticated or not. We're using some middleware to make sure that we're authenticated. And let's go over here. We're not going to need our Lodash here. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to get rid of this, which is just shuffling up a bunch of links. And what I really want to do here, and I just send back an empty array to see if our tests still pass. Okay. So what I want to do is, if I look at my test over here, for my routes, let's actually start to write our test. So the 401 is fine, that's going to work, but let's just think about what we expect to get back here. You see actually what's going on here is that in order to authenticate the user, this is actually going through some workflow where the user is getting created. We're logging in the user to the application, right, with this post method. And then we're going to make a GET request here. But let's just be a little bit more specific. Let's say that we expect our response body not just to be an array, but to have a length of 3. This is going to fail because we're sending back an empty array, right? Let's see, I might have made this mistake that I seem to make all the time. Let's take a look at our server, configure routes, and let's look at our employees route. Here's our members route. Let's try to see why this number is 11. Let's just make sure I'm testing out the right thing. So if I look at my employee test, so I don't want to go here. I want to go to API employees. So I'm expecting a 200, and with that response, now it should say, right, you got 0, you expect it to have 3. So we could get a quick green if we wanted to by going back to our actual route. Again, really you want to keep a minimum number of files open at a time. I could get a quick pass by doing this. Now we'll be passing, but that's not what I'm looking for. So what is my test going to do? What I really want to do is I want to get my employees. So let's actually start to do that. If we end up going up to our route, we can end up bringing in our model. So in order to do this, we're going to have our employee model. let's say employee find, then this is going to give us our employees. And we'll say response.send employees. Now this is not going to end up working because we don't have an employee. So we want to go over here and say mongoose model employee, in which case we're going to have to bring mongoose in. So we're not pulling this in from another module. We're using this sort of shortcut of saying, hey, look, there's an employee that's being registered. And we end up getting this error. Let's just take a look and see what the register is. So employee is not defined, and that's true. We want to do this. This is our model itself. And again, we don't have anything in the database. And with all these tests, we're basically going to be wiping out the database and adding our whatever we want to add to it every time. But I can get this to pass by doing something like this. Employees equals Larry, Curly, and let me just do this silly thing over here. These are now properties. These are all first names. So the same way that my employee gets added, my user gets added before this test. I'm going to do another before each, create the employees. And here I could say employee create employees, and that's going to happen in a before each. And if I'm going to do that, let me also just bring in my employee model up here. In which case, we end up getting this to pass. Now, so right now, we could actually go over here, and we could say Git.status. Again, not a ton of files that got changed. If we look at Git.Diff, we'll see that we end up, so this will just show you what you ended up changing. Changed very little, we added some stuff. So I'll say git.add git.commit, and we'll say added route and test for employees. And again, with sort of simplistic Git workflow, I can go over here and I could say, let me push this up to the origin. And we could go and push this up. And if I went back to my Git, I would see this show up. I could end up doing a pull request. We'll put a comment here. See, someone could go in here and take a look and see what ended up changing, right? So basically, we've ended up adding this route. We pulled this route in. And again, most of the code here is our test. We're not necessarily worried that, we could dry out some of the tests, not all that critical. But once we end up doing that, someone else could come in and take a look at this and say, well, that looks good. +1, they could merge it. Confirm. Go back over here. And I could look and I could see that in my master branch over here, I could look at my server, app, routes, and see that that made it in. And at which point, again, this is kind of up to you. I could go over here and get rid of this branch, but it's not really all that critical one way or the other. And maybe you don't want to do that until you're a little bit more comfortable to know that this ended up getting made it in here. So again, since we ended up merging this remotely, we need to go in here. At this point, I could check out my master branch. I could do a git.pull. This we could actually test and see that this ended up getting deployed. By the way, we could have done this here as well. And again, notice we didn't end up opening up a browser to do this. So here we are, we're running, that's our remote. Here's our local one, which actually is not running. So I'm going to say npm start. And if I reload this and I log in, then I'm logged in as Obama. If I went over here and I said API employees, that's fine. I don't have any employees there, but I see that route is actually working. Just as an aside, we could go here and we could log out. And now if we went to API employees, we would end up getting a 401 because we don't actually have permission to see that route. Now, again, I don't need to really do that because I ran my tests. I mean, I could do a sanity check to see that that's happening. But once I end up doing that, I could actually even go and push this up to my to Heroku, git.push Heroku master. And while that's actually getting pushed up to Heroku, right, in my Waffle.io, this is kind of interesting. What Waffle.io will end up doing, there's a way that you could coordinate these together. So every time you end up doing another branch and you end up merging it, it automatically will add a card here. But again, it's not really a huge thing one way or the other. What you're really doing is sort of keeping track of the work that you have or what's in progress. I can move that over and say that it's done. And so now if I go back here and we go and I'm going to run this now on my server. So here I am on Heroku, and let me log in again. So now I'm logged in. If I go over here and say /API employees, I can see that that change ended up making it up there. Again, the next thing could be to add client-side routes as well. So let's end this video. Again, that sort of takes you through the workflow with a little bit more of a look at how you would end up using some kind of board. And again, the nice thing about the Waffle.io is really sort of simplistic to look at. So it's pretty easy. Again, you could go in and you could end up, writing a bunch of cards, even if some things are dependent upon other things, and only move them over when they're ready to be worked on, and then someone can end up grabbing them, or you could assign them to somebody else.